Joining us is candidate for Texas Attorney General and current Central Texas Congressman Chip Roy. Congressman, thank you for returning here to East Texas for this program. How are you feeling?
Great to be in Tyler. It's an area I'm very familiar with. As I think I've said before, my parents lived in Mount Pleasant for about 25 years, just up the road, and my great aunt was here in Tyler for years. She passed away last year, but spent a lot of time in Tyler over the years, and good to be back.
Well, my condolences to your family.
Oh no, thanks.
But
she had a good run. It was a good one.
But let's talk about this runoff. In the March 3rd primary, you garnered around 32% of the vote, less than first-place finisher, State Senator Mays Middleton, who received about 39%. What are you doing now to appeal to folks who may not have sided with you in March?
Well, first of all, the biggest thing I'm doing is spending as much time as I can in the state. As people know, I'm burning both ends of the candle because I am a sitting member of Congress, and we have a 2-3 seat majority, and I take that very seriously, so I can't skip votes. So I'm trying to do what I can when I'm in the state and make sure that we get around the state. We're in the middle of a tour right now. We're in Houston, San Antonio. We're out in Fredericksburg, Georgetown, Longview, here in Tyler today, going out to Frisco, Denton, Weatherford, Midland, Odessa, all over the course of this week, driving across the state of Texas, talking to people and winning their votes hand to hand. But also, we're spending a lot on ads, and we're up. And my opponent spent about $18 million in the first race. I didn't inherit $250 million to go spend to try to attack my opposition. My opponent did. And I didn't go negative in the primary. He did. And now he's going to get a taste of his own medicine.
You don't feel you've gone negative in any way?
In the primary,
you've talked about his experience, and you feel a lack of it.
Well, he doesn't have experience. That's not going negative. That's just a fact. But in March 3rd, in the primary, go look at any of my ads. I didn't go negative. He did. He ran about $18 million of ads attacking my background and my career and what I've done for the state of Texas. So what I've been doing since is pointing out that the people of Texas deserve an actual attorney who's been in court, who's prosecuted bad guys, who's ran complex litigation, who is the former first assistant attorney general, rather than someone who's never really practiced law and is trying to buy the seat.
You mentioned you've been on a tour going around the state. What are you hearing most from voters about what they want from the next attorney general? Because you would be succeeding incumbent Ken Paxton.
Well, people right now are very concerned about the March of Islam across the state of Texas. We talked about that before. It's something that I hear at every stop. It's by far the issue people care the most about. It's very real, and people are feeling it, not just in the East Plano Islamic Center, but throughout the state of Texas. And this is something that people want to see addressed. They want us to acknowledge that it's a political ideology, and you can't just hide behind the First Amendment while you have imams and people adhering to the Muslim Brotherhood's declaration that they need to wage jihad against Western civilization. So that's an issue that's really critically important. But the other things we're talking about are the extent to which you have these nonprofit NGOs, leftist organizations that are funding both the Islamification of Texas, but also putting DAs and judges in our cities that are letting criminals out on the streets, endangering the people of Austin, Texas, where I live, I live outside of Austin, the people of San Antonio, the people of Houston. I talked to Crime Stoppers in Houston, and 220-something Houstonians have been killed since 2019 by felons who had gone into the system or were let out again by judges and DAs who failed to prosecute them. People are tired of that. They're tired of open borders. They're glad the president secured the border, but they're tired of the results of open borders, and they want an attorney general to stand up and fight that. And the final point is people are caring about the what I call the corporatification of Texas, where you've got significant decisions being made by boardrooms in New York and throughout the country that don't have anything to do with the people here. You got data centers getting put in where people are concerned about water. You've got things that are happening where people are concerned about the drain on the grid. And you've got people buying up our ranches and our farms and our lands, and they want an attorney general that's going to defend them, and that's what I'm talking about as I go across the state of Texas.
A couple things I want to touch on there, and I know we talked about it a bit last time, but just to remind voters, you mentioned what you call an Islamification of Texas. Why do you feel as though that's a problem?
Well, what we've seen is the United States has invited 5.5 million people from majority Muslim countries since 9/11, which is essentially political suicide. And as a result, we've got significant populations that have been clustering in the state of Texas. Now, it's by design. If you read the memoranda from the Muslim Brotherhood, if you look at what CARE has been up to, if you look at the Holy Land Foundation case in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, you see that it's a purposeful effort under their own words and their own speeches and imams that are giving speeches to literally Islamify Texas and to wage jihad against our state and the West. That is something the American people care about.
What's illegal about what they're doing?
Well, it's something that, by the way, advancing Sharia law is in direct contradiction to the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, subjugating women, marrying off 9-year-old girls, telling men that they can unilaterally divorce women, carrying out something that is contradictory to our values and our Judeo-Christian values in this country, built upon those Judeo-Christian values when we founded our country in the Constitution and the Declaration.
I believe we've talked about your belief that, Sharia law would be a dual parallel legal system to what we have
Well,
now.
it's literally happening in the United Kingdom as we speak, because they allowed it to come up to alongside the civil justice system, and they now have competing systems of law, and they want to do that to Texas and to the United States.
What evidence do you have any evidence to suggest that's happening right now in Texas?
Absolutely. And the governor had to go shut down 2 Sharia courts in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. We know what's going on right now. We know that there's these binding agreements that are being carried on, which, by the way, were upheld in the United Kingdom, which set the stage for 85 Sharia courts. And what those agreements do is they subjugate women to not be able to carry out their full rights under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. This is something that is fairly well documented and evident. We had rape gangs going out throughout the United Kingdom that were being protected because you had classes that were saying that they were going to be able to hide behind the Sharia courts to say that they could do all of this, and we're not going to have that in the state of Texas.
I just want to clarify, because if someone goes against, say, the Constitution of Texas or the Constitution of the United States, does
Sure.
something illegal, they're going to be prosecuted for that. If someone decides they don't want to follow the law, that comes with consequences. What's the difference between someone saying, they're going to do this, but if they do something illegal, they're going to be prosecuted for it?
Well, but what you have right now, and we need to go after and prosecute some people and go get the evidence and make the cases in court. And by the way, the governor is pushing on the local DAs and so forth to go after these Sharia courts to put pressure on them to shut them down. But what's really happening is you have agreements that are being forced upon people. You have enclaves that are being created as essentially Muslim-only areas, and everybody knows this to be true. Nobody argues with the fact that there are areas in Plano, areas in Richardson, areas in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex where literally there are real estate agents who will only sell houses to Muslim applicants, to people trying to buy the houses. You have the East Plano Islamic Center, which isn't just the big compound. It already exists. We already see what's happening. And by the way, a massive expansion of that is occurring in Dallas-Fort Worth under the abuse of our H-1B visa program, which is under massive fraud investigation. It should be. And all of that needs to be looked at by the Attorney General of the state of Texas, not just the federal government.
You kind of allude to it there, but what would you do as Attorney General about this?
Well, first of all, I would do a lot of what the current governor and AG are doing, which is you go after the municipal utility districts, you look at the Deceptive Trade Practices Act, you go look at the Texas Workforce Commission, but you also need to stand up and make very clear that Islam is a political ideology and that political ideology is not something that you can advance to disrupt our way of life and our laws and advance Sharia and then hide behind the First Amendment to do so. You can believe what you want to believe. You can believe at home. You can pray to whomever you want to. But when you start advancing an entire effort and that is organized and spoken publicly in direct contradiction to our laws, then we need to work to shut them down.
What you mentioned, the DCPA there, what does that have to do with what you're mentioning? Just kind of clarify that.
Well, look, I'm under the Deceptive Trade Practices Act. You've got them, trying to say, hey, we're building a, perfectly open to anybody compound, but we know for sure that they're implementing Sharia law in that area and clamping down on the real estate agents to not sell the homes. So this all needs to be investigated and flushed out. And by the way, the governor did a fantastic job, along with the AG, of getting a federal judge to look into CARE and go track where all of their money is coming from. That's the Council on Arab-Islamic Relations. I think that's what it stands for. And that's an organization that, by the way, he declared a terrorist organization. I've got legislation to do that. The president's looking into them. And we've got a federal judge that's now looked into what they're doing and follow their money because it's corrupt and they're tied to terrorist entities. And by the way, they've got an unindicted co-conspirator from the Holy Land Foundation working at CARE. And that organization is trying to advance Islam into our communities, and we're not going to let it happen.
What would you say to folks who may be here in Texas right now, who, particularly Muslims, who may be looking to move to Texas, who are concerned, about this, who are concerned that, this talk about Sharia law only demonizes them?
Well, don't promote Sharia law.
That's the answer in your view? That's
Yeah,
it?
it's not consistent with our values, our Constitution, our way of life, or our laws. And so that's the reality, and we're going to be making sure we try to enforce the laws that we have here in Texas.
And you mentioned earlier, you talked about data centers, which are a big topic, here in East Texas in particular. Anything the AG's office can do about data centers, well, what's the concern about them, I guess, is the first question.
Well, there's a couple of fronts. Number one, when you talk about the AI itself, right, you've got federal entities that want to supersede Texas law, and I think that's a mistake mistake. We in Texas need to be able to protect our families, protect our children. We don't need to have some federal limit on what we do in Texas in terms of defending and protecting our families. But that's on the technology side. The data centers themselves raise a lot of questions. They raise questions particularly about the drain on the grid. These are massive sucks on power. We need to know that we're going to have the ability to sustain these things when we get them created and developed. The wind and solar that is now about a third of our power development, that is not always reliable, and you've got to make sure you've got nuclear or gas-fired energy to be able to keep these things running. And I want to prioritize people's homes, hospitals, businesses before you get these data centers sucking off of our grid. Water is an issue, particularly in West Texas where these things are getting put up. We need to make sure that we've got these things to be self-sustaining. I'm not sure the contracts getting put in place are holding them accountable to make sure that they are actually in charge of all of their water and recycling it rather than sucking out of the ground and taking water, particularly when we're in drought conditions and people are concerned about water. Those are two big issues, but there's also the issues of zoning and the areas where they're getting built. There's night sky problems. There's issues in terms of these massive data centers getting put in. And then there's the transmission line issues that we're dealing with because of all of the Green New Scam subsidies that were put in. We've got all of these transmission lines from wind and solar, and now you got the data centers that are trying to move power all over the place rather than just having local form nuclear power, which is what we should have, but we have federal barriers to that. As Attorney General, I'll be fighting to free us up to do those things and to be making sure that we're protecting the rights of Texans through this whole process.
A couple things there. Regarding water, there's been some talk about data centers using a closed loop system.
Yeah.
Is that something, what are your thoughts on that? You think that's a good, bad idea?
Well, whatever they do and whatever the technology, closed loop system, otherwise, they need to be able to maintain their own water supply, and they need to make sure that we need to make sure that they are having to foot the bill for what they do if they're taking any water from local Texans, but importantly that they have a system that manages their water so they don't have a major impact locally. Same thing with the grid, by the way, right? They ought to be able to either have local gas-fired technology. If they want to put solar panels on the roof, fine by me. If they want to have a local nuclear reactor, then let's fight it out with the feds. But don't come suck power off the grid without doing your part to make sure that Texans aren't going to be impacted. And by the way, electricity prices going up as the demand sucks on our grid.
How do you view the grid today, particularly after Winter Storm Uri? There was a lot of talk about it. How do you view the effectiveness of the grid?
Well, look, I think there was a lot of solidification of some of the issues that led to that problem. We had some freezing of the facilities in some of our gas plants and so forth. I think the governor and others worked hard to address those, and I was part of looking into that when that occurred. And I felt the impact of it in the hill country where we had ice that created massive issues. But it's also a continued ongoing concern of the subsidized form of wind and solar. You can say whatever you want about wind and solar, and you say, oh, it's cheaper than gas-fired or cheaper than nuclear. No, it's not. It's subsidized. And by the way, I fought when I was last year in Congress in the big, beautiful bill to get about half of the Green New Scam subsidies repealed, and a liberal PAC in California ran $1 million of ads against me in Texas in a primary. They didn't say who they were. They just ran ads saying I was a rhino and all this stuff. Why? Because they fear me as Attorney General because they know I'll shut them down. You shouldn't subsidize these entities. Let them compete. If they got a cheaper, better product, they can go beat gas-fired, they can go beat nuclear. But instead, they're trying to sell a song and a dance, and then they have unreliable power that has to be backed up by gas and nuclear. So we ought to free up the market and let it work.
Well, going off of that, what would you tell voters about your approach to renewable energy compared to what your approach may be to, fossil fuels?
Stop subsidizing anything, let the market work, and we need reliable power.
But you would allow development of wind, solar, gas, what have you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, it's subject to other issues that flow from that, but it's already been massively subsidized. I promise you, if the subsidies go away, you're going to have massive expansion of gas-fired energy, and then you're going to have more impetus behind nuclear energy because it's reliable and it's dense and it's appropriate in terms of what you produce. Some solar is fine and it's pretty efficient and effective, but you just saw the damage by hail to all of those solar panels that just destroyed one of the solar facilities. Who could have seen that coming in Texas? Hard to believe that occurred. Who could see windmills freezing up in the middle of the winter? Who could see a cloudy, windless day where suddenly you have a massive draw on the grid? Of course you're going to see all of that. The only reason these things exist is because the federal government borrowed money from China, indebting our kids and grandkids to subsidize power that's no good so people could ride around patting themselves on the back for being green. How about we actually have reliable power on the grid?
Let's talk about the Ten Commandments. There was a recent ruling by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals allowing Texas to display the Ten Commandments in public school classrooms. Your thoughts on the ruling?
That's a good thing. A lot of those judges are good friends of mine on the Fifth Circuit. That's the right ruling, and it's a good thing to be able to do it. But look, at the end of the day, we're going to have to be really careful because we're dealing, as I said, with this march of Islam across the state of Texas. And I would just remind people that they're going to have to be very serious about what doors they open on this front. But I'm all supportive of having the Ten Commandments. Pretty uncontroversial in my view.
And correct me if I'm wrong on this. It's my understanding you want the Attorney General's office to be quicker at responding to open records requests.
Yeah, very much so.
Why is this important to you, and how will you go about doing so?
Well, I mean, one of the most important things we need in a Republican form of government is transparency. We need you guys to be able to get access to information in the media. We need local activists, local people that are concerned in their community. Like, let's take, for example, water demands on an AI data center. People ought to be able to get to know that very quickly. They ought to be able to know what's going to impact in their community is going to be. The transmission lines going across the hill country right now. We have a lot of ability in this state to be able to run pipelines and transmission lines and whatever just by kind of almost fiat. Corporations can come in and basically kind of work a deal with the state and boom, they can move it. Locals need to be able to have a voice. They need to be able to get information, and they need to get it quickly. And the AG's office is the most important entity in the state to be able to ensure that people get a rapid response. It needs to be quick, and it needs to be justified. And I think the default position ought to be on openness and transparency. There ought to be if there's an explicit ban for some, safety reason or something needs to be redacted okay, great. But let's be very open when somebody asks for the information and say, we're sorry, this information can't be distributed because of X. But otherwise, the default position should be openness, and it ought to be a quick response.
How do you go about changing that?
It's a cultural thing. I mean, you got to basically walk in on day one and just say, we're going to get these things. Whatever the current response rate is, I don't know what that is. Let's assume, I'm just going to make up a number. Let's say it's 180 days. Make it 90. Say we're going to get these out in 90 and put the resources and the ability to get that done quickly. Use tools, use AI, whatever you need to do to get those going quickly. But if it's 90, make it 45. Culture is about an attitude and saying, look, we're going to be quick on the responses, and then it's review. I used to review those when I was in that office as the first assistant attorney general 12 years ago, or 11 years ago, I guess. And you got to look at them. You got to make a good decision and do it quick. And I want them to be thorough in their responses. If somebody asks, they need to know why, and it needs to be backed up under law as to why they don't get the information.
Could you see that requiring more employees, potentially more funding for the AG's office?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at that. I mean, the budget's quite large. Child support's another big area that needs to be, I think, improved, sped up, made better for customer service, so that people get a fair and quick child support payments, but also it's fair both for the moms, the dads, and the kids. But you got to look at the whole budget and figure out how you allocate resources. I'm a big believer that you can squeeze a lot, and make, squeeze blood out of the turnip, if you will. By working smart and efficient and effective and just setting expectation and demands. Excellence usually follows the demands of the leaders.
Let's talk about that child support division a little bit. To go about changing that, is that a similar like cultural shift you feel in your view? That's all that would require, or it would mandate a bit more than that?
Well, child support will take, yes, I think a cultural shift, but it will also take, I think, significant investment and continued support in technology. And I'm not, frankly, to be blunt, fully up to speed on the current state of the technology. I used to know quite a bit about it, but I do know from talking to people that it's lagging where it needs to be up and running and quick and efficient and effective, and that we need greater response times on customer service. All that, again, it's cultural, but it's also having the technology to give you the information to, boom, be able to respond, right? You know, when you use systems, if the system's really good, you can be more effective at response. When the system's garbage, it's hard, right? If you're going and looking at file folders in the cabinet, that's harder than clicking and pulling it up on a screen. So we got to have the technology match the culture.
We've talked about AI a little bit throughout this interview. How would you utilize, if at all, AI if you're elected to the Attorney General's position?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll just be blunt on that. I mean, I know, my wife's an attorney. She works in roughly the oil and gas space. They use AI quite a bit in what they do, and I know a lot of law firms are using it. It can make you 2 and 3 and 4 times more effective. I'm going to have to go do an audit of the entire office. You have 700 lawyers in the biggest law firm in the state of Texas. We need to follow best practices. We need to figure out how to make sure we've got the best talent, building the best talent, and you're not going to turn things over to technology, but where you can use tools to be more efficient, more effective, then you should use them. I'm a big fan of technology as a tool to support human endeavors. I'm not a fan of technology replacing humanity. And I got a whole other theory about what's going on with that and AI and what iPhones and technology are doing to our kids and our grandkids. And we got to do a lot of work on that. As Attorney General, that's going to be a priority for me, protecting our kids from the abuse of technology and the use of AI and technology to target our kids. It's just extraordinary where you've got these bots that are going after our kids. You got kids that are killing themselves because they're engaging with basically fake people through AI that are encouraging them to kill themselves, encouraging them to do all sorts of manners of crazy things. And we need to have a lot of boundaries put on that and limits. I mean, we've got all these limits on alcohol and tobacco. And as a proud Southern Baptist, I've often joked that I would rather have a case of beer and a carton of cigarettes in my kids' hands than an iPhone and access to, AI and all the technology. I say that a little tongue in cheek, but only sort of, because, the addiction level and the dangers that are posed by these dastardly devices, and now with AI putting it on steroids, I think we all need to be alerted to that. And as Attorney General, I'm going to be siding with parents and communities and trying to protect our kids and not big corporate interests.
Let's talk about the border. How secure is the border now, in your view, and what role, if any, does the Attorney General's office play in border security?
The border is very secure. Our legal immigration system is still too open and being abused, frankly. We need to tighten that down, whether it's H-1B visas or other visas. I introduced a bill to ban U visas, which allows illegal immigrants to be able to stay here on a visa if they're accused, if they basically say they're a victim of crime, and there's a lot of fraud in that. So there's a lot of visa cleanup we need to do. But importantly, we need to codify in Congress. Before I get out of Congress, I hope we can do this. It's hard in this environment, but we need to codify the laws that need to be changed, that the current president and the current leadership and Secretary Mullen and Tom Homan and Stephen Miller and all that are there carrying out. You got to tighten up asylum. You got to tighten up parole. You got to tighten up catch and release. You got to stop all the abuses that were carried out under Biden and Mayorkas. Otherwise, they'll be right back at it the next time there's a Democrat administration. I can promise you as Attorney General, I'll be fighting them tooth and nail. And as a member of Congress, I got a bill passed called the SUE Act, attached to the Lake and Riley Act, that will give us standing to go into court and sue the federal government when they're failing to secure the border. So we need to do it. It is secure right now, at least, relatively speaking. The flow has stopped, which proves it was all about willpower. It wasn't about, there's just all these powers. Well, what can we do? No, they were abusing it. And they were using asylum and parole to do it purposely to dump people in the United States. So we need to make it to where that never happens again.
The May 26th runoff is just in a couple of weeks.
Sure.
Is there anything I did not ask you would like to add?
No, I just want to reiterate what we opened with, is that I am an attorney. I've been a prosecutor. I put bad guys in jail. I ran the complex litigation when I was the first assistant attorney general. I've been a lawyer for Governor Perry. It matters that you've sat in court and you've appeared before a judge. That matters. My opponent has not done it. Literally, he inherited money from his family. He's spending that money to try to buy the seat and try to ultimately become governor. He's never really been in a courtroom, and he's never practiced law meaningfully. And that's led to, I think, some really bad decisions as state senator in different bills that he's introduced that I think were dangerous. For example, creating the slippery slope for an epic city and mosque to be able to put housing developments in and around a mosque. It was literally in a bill that he did, and then he edited it to say that it wasn't in there in the author's intent, but he left it on the calendars committee. The bottom line is you got to have somebody who's been there, who's ready on day one. You can't have on-the-job training for probably the most important legal job in the entire country. And I believe that the Texas Attorney General is the most important legal job in the country.
One last thing quickly. If you do not end up winning this runoff, do you plan on endorsing in this race?
Look, I'm going to rally around Republicans and support Republicans against Democrats in the fall. That's what we do, and that's what we have to do, because we need to make sure we win in November. And I'm not one of the ones that are blackpilled, by the way, that Republicans are going to get trounced in the midterm elections. We've got to go out and deliver and fight for the people. I believe we can do that in Congress. I believe that we can do that in Texas. And we'll all unite regardless of who wins our primaries.
So would you endorse Senator Middleton?
Yeah, I'm going to support the Republican candidates.
All right. Congressman Chip Roy, candidate for Texas Attorney General in the GOP runoff. We appreciate you coming in and taking the time.
Hey, I appreciate it.